You know that feeling, right? Where you read some piece of expert guidance and something in your gut just goes, wait a minute, these people don't actually know what they're talking about. And then you feel a little guilty for even thinking it because you're not supposed to think that. You're supposed to defer. They're the experts and you're not. You've had that moment. I've had that moment. Most of the people I talk to have had it dozens of times in the past few years. And I want to spend this episode talking about what that moment actually means. Because I don't think it's just frustration. I don't think it's just, another news cycle. I think we are living through the end of a specific 100-year-old story about who gets to know things, and what's rising to replace it is going to change almost everything, including what we do with our money. I'm Bram Kanstein. This is Bitcoin for Millennials. And if you are enjoying my content, it would mean a lot to me if you could subscribe to the channel and like my video to support my journey. Thanks a lot. Now let's dive in. I want to start in 1976. That's when 72% of Americans trusted mass media. 72%. That's according to Gallup, which has been asking that question since the Nixon era. Fast forward to 2025, that number is 28. Congress polls at 9%. Television news at 12. And the thing is that this isn't just about journalists. It isn't just politicians. It's the same story across the entire credentialed class. The people we were told to defer to, the PhDs, the tenured, the robed, the degreed, the branded experts who earned the right through institutional blessing to tell the rest of us what to think, what to eat, how to learn, and where to invest. They've lost the room completely. Now, the interesting question, and what I want to come back to a few times in this episode, isn't whether this collapse is deserved. By now, I think we all know this. The interesting question is what's rising in place of what's falling, because nothing just disappears. I'll give you my thesis straight up, and then I'm going to walk you through the whole thing slowly. For roughly 100 years, the Western world was organized around the figure of the expert, the specialist, the credentialed authority who, through institutional blessing, earned the right to tell the rest of us how the world works. That era is ending, not because experts are evil, not because knowledge doesn't matter. The model was just always incomplete. It worked when knowledge was actually scarce and hard to transmit. It doesn't work anymore now that knowledge is abundant and searchable and testable and mostly free. And what's rising in the place of what I'm going to call the expert regime is something the industrial age actively tried to stamp out: the generalist, the polymath, the curious person who reads across fields, who runs their own experiments, who trusts their own judgment more than they trust a guild. I'm going to call this person the sovereign generalist. And I think the sovereign generalist is the defining figure of the next century, exactly the way the credentialed expert was the defining figure of the last one. But before I can really land that, you have to see where the whole expert class came from. Because here's what most people get wrong. They assume we've always lived like this. Experts on top, lay people on the bottom, specialists in every lane. Please consult a professional before doing anything. That's not how humans have lived for most of history. That's a very recent arrangement. And once you see when and how it was built, you start to understand why it's coming apart right now. So let me take you back to 1910. Abraham Flexner was a classics graduate, not a physician. Never practiced medicine a day in his life. In 1910, he published a report for the Carnegie Foundation called Medical Education in the United States and Canada. And the line from that report I can't get out of my head is this: the privileges of the medical school can no longer be open to casual strollers from the highway. It is necessary to install a doorkeeper. Think about that word for a second. That's not a teacher, it's not a healer, it is not a researcher, it's a guard. And the point is to keep people out. Before Flexner, the US had about 160 medical schools serving 28,000 students. Every approach to healing had its own school, from homeopathy to osteopathy to chiropractic school and physico-medical school. By 1930, 76 schools remained. 5 of 7 historically black medical schools closed. Rockefeller's General Education Board poured roughly $180 million into the survivors. 1 model of medicine, 1 licensing body, 1 approved pharmacopoeia, and 1 set of acceptable questions. Now let's call this what it actually was: a knowledge monopoly. Hold that phrase too, because we're going to meet another one later that operates exactly the same way, just on money instead of medicine. 1 year later, in 1911, Frederick Winslow Taylor publishes The Principles of Scientific Management. This book was voted in 2001 the most influential management book of the whole 20th century. And Taylor's thesis was that workers are stupid. Systems are smart, and in his words, in the past the man has been first. In the future, the system must be first. So, the worker should not think, the worker should execute what the efficiency expert, stopwatch in hand, has already fought for him. Lenin loved Taylor. Henry Ford also loved Taylor. The industrial century was built on this one idea. The specialist knows and the worker obeys. Then in 1922, Walter Lippmann drops the political theory into place. In his book called Public Opinion, he coins the phrase the manufacture of consent. And his argument: ordinary people are too distracted, too busy, too limited to govern themselves. So democracy has to depend on a class of experts quietly steering things on their behalf. 3 years later, in The Phantom Public, he goes further. He said, "The public must be put in its place so that each of us may live free of the trampling and the roar of a bewildered herd." Now, to be clear, the bewildered herd is you, in case you missed that. So, that's the charter right there. Flexner gave the experts a monopoly over medicine. Taylor gave them a monopoly over work, and Lippmann gave them a moral cover over democracy. And then you layer on a century of credential inflation, where about 6% of American adults held a bachelor degree in 1950, where about 37% of people do today. And that's how we got the world that we grew up in. Being a generalist was coded as lazy. Being a polymath was coded as undisciplined. Everybody was told, pick a lane, specialize, and defer to the credentialed authority in every other lane. For a while, this kind of worked, or it looked like it worked, as there have been many achievements in, for example, medical, energy, and digital industries. But starting around 2008, the bill came due. Now, really listen to the following sentence. It was spoken by Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Federal Reserve, testifying to the Joint Economic Committee on March 28, 2007. He said, "At this juncture, however, the impact on the broader economy and financial markets of the problems in the subprime market seems likely to be contained." Likely to be contained. 18 months later, Lehman Brothers collapsed and the global financial system seized up. Maybe you've heard something similar coming out of the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's mouth in the past few weeks. He said there is a very good chance the federal budget deficit has peaked under President Donald Trump. Anyway, Queen Elizabeth II visited the London School of Economics in November 2008, and she asked the assembled professors the only question that actually mattered. Why did nobody see this financial crisis coming? And the truth is, a few people actually did. Raghuram Rajan presented his warning at Jackson Hole in August 2005, and Larry Summers called it slightly Luddite. Nouriel Roubini, Peter Schiff, Michael Burry, they all dismissed. Alan Greenspan himself, the man Time magazine called the Maestro, he went in front of Congress in October 2008 and said, and I quote, he had found a flaw in the model of the world he'd built his career on. 50 years of orthodoxy retracted under oath. And nobody was fired. The same PhDs who missed it kept running the show. Bitcoin in self-custody is the revolution, but as we've recently seen with the cold card exploit, you could have done everything right and still fall victim to faulty software. When I realized I never had the proper setup, even though I thought I had, I knew I needed help, and that's how I found the Bitcoin way. Their security experts taught me how to self-custody my Bitcoin the right way with air-gapped wallets, backups, running a node, the full architecture. None of their customers were affected by the cold card exploit because they had the proper setup. Bitcoin is way less stressful when it's not a solo mission. That's why I partner with the Bitcoin Way, aiming to help 1,000 people get a 100% self-custody setup so they can enjoy the same sovereignty as I do. You can book a free intro call today with the Bitcoin Way team at thebitcoinway.com/Bram. You'll end up with a bulletproof setup, more skills, and a lot more confidence. That's thebitcoinway.com/Bram. And you can still feel it, right? You feel that something broke that never really got fixed. And then came COVID. I'm going to read to you another sentence. Fauci on 60 Minutes on March 2020. He said, "There's no reason to be walking around with a mask." 3 weeks later, the CDC reversed. By summer, universal masking was policy. And then in January 2024, in a transcribed interview with a House subcommittee, Fauci was asked about the 6-foot distancing rule. The rule that closed schools, shut businesses, reorganized daily life for 2 years. And his answer verbatim was, "I don't recall, it sort of just happened." It sort of just happened. When I first connected these dots, I sat with that phrase for like a day because it's so revealing, right? The rule that shut down the global economy didn't come from a study. It didn't come from a data-driven deliberation. It sort of just happened. And millions of people shaped their entire lives around it. And now that Fauci is made to appear in Senate hearings to investigate his role during COVID, he is pleading the fifth and saying nothing. Or take the lab leak. In February 2020, 27 scientists signed a letter in The Lancet condemning, and I'm quoting, "conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin." 2 years later, emails that became public revealed the letter was organized by Peter Daszak, whose organization EcoHealth Alliance funded bad coronavirus research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. By 2023, the US Department of Energy and the FBI had both assessed that a lab origin was the most likely explanation. The conspiracy theory was now a live US intelligence assessment. Meanwhile, in the quiet corners of actual science, something called the replication crisis was tearing up the floorboards. In 2005, John Ioannidis published a paper in PLOS Medicine. The title was, and I'm not making this up, "Why Most Published Research Findings Are False." In 2012, Begley and Ellis reported in Nature that only 6 out of 53 landmark preclinical cancer studies could be reproduced. In 2015, the Open Science Collaboration replicated 100 psychology studies. 36 came back with statistical significance. The field that gave us most of the behavioral nudges policymakers still rely on is batting a .36. And I haven't even mentioned nutrition. The USDA food pyramid. US adult obesity was 13% in 1962, 42% in 2018. Or the opioid crisis, over 700,000 overdose deaths in the US between 1999 and 2022, delivered not by street dealers but by licensed MDs writing branded prescriptions, endorsed by peer-reviewed medicine, guided by a 1-paragraph letter in the New England Journal of Medicine that Purdue Pharma cited roughly 600 times in its marketing. Each of these failures was systemic. Each one came out of exactly the expert system the 20th century built to protect us. And so on, one by one, regular people started doing something the expert regime had trained them never to do. They started looking and thinking for themselves. Now, here's what most people get wrong about what happened next. They think it was chaos. They think the collapse of expert authority was just noise and conspiracy and TikTok doctors. Some of it was, but underneath the noise, something remarkable was getting built. And nobody is talking about this yet with the frame I think it deserves. The computer operating system Linux runs basically 100% of the world's top supercomputers. Not Microsoft, not Apple, but Linux, an open source project with distributed volunteer contributors. GitHub hosts over 100 million developers. The entire internet, the stack that runs your phone, your car, your bank, is decentralized open source code. In education, we see a similar story. Khan Academy, started by Sal Khan, tutoring his cousin over YouTube in 2006, now has more than 150 million registered users. MIT put 2,500 courses online for free. An account named 3 Blue 1 Brown is one guy with a laptop and an animation library, and he teaches more people calculus per video than most universities teach per year. Homeschooling, according to a 2023 Washington Post investigation covering 60% of the US school-age population, is up 51% since 2017. And we all know journalism has already broken. In March 2023, Silicon Valley Bank collapses. Bill Ackman and Bern Hobart and a handful of others were tracking the bank run in real time on Twitter while CNBC was running scheduled programming. The Hunter Biden laptop story, reported by the New York Post in October 2020, was actively suppressed by the legacy platforms and eventually confirmed by the Washington Post and the Times in 2022. Matt Taibbi, Barry Weiss, Glenn Greenwald, Andrew Sullivan, they all left legacy outlets to write directly to readers on Substack, which now reports over 4 million paid subscriptions. Joe Rogan got a $250 million Spotify deal, and he reaches more people per episode than most cable news networks reach in prime time. And then there is medicine. Joe Tippins had a stage 4 small cell lung cancer in 2016 and had 3 months to live. A veterinarian tells him about a dog dewormer called venbendazole. He tries it, and within a year, no evidence of the disease existed anymore. Now, is this a confirmed cure? No, because he was also on an immunotherapy trial. But his story seeded a global online community of cancer patients running their own protocols, publishing their own results, refusing to die quietly because the approved pathway didn't work for them. And recently, we saw billionaire GitLab co-founder Sid Sijbrandij using AI alongside a global team of selected doctors to treat his rare and aggressive stage 4 spinal bone cancer after exhausting standard medical options. He treated his diagnosis like a startup, using technology to analyze dense data and coordinate personalized therapies. Now he is cancer-free and open sourcing his full process. Now, my point here is that the expert regime used to have a monopoly on what you were even allowed to try. That's why I mentioned the term earlier, knowledge monopoly. This is what its end looks like. People refusing to ask permission anymore. Now I'm going to show you why this all matters so much more than it did 5 years ago. But first, let's go somewhere even more recent. ChatGPT launched in November 2022. 2 months later, it had 100 million monthly users, the fastest adopted consumer product in human history. A year after that, Harvard and BCG published the most rigorous study we have on what AI does to knowledge work. They ran 758 consultants through actual tasks. With GPT-4, the consultants completed 12% more tasks, 25% faster, and produced work rated 40% higher in quality. Below average consultants improved by 43%. It compressed the entire skill distribution. And that was only GPT-4. We're almost at GPT-6. Now, let's translate that. The most expensive thing in the modern economy, which is knowledge worker labor, now sits behind a $20 a month subscription. A business founder today can prototype a product in less than a weekend that would have taken a team of 6 developers 6 months in 2014. Maor Shlomo built Base44, an AI app builder, all by himself in early 2025. 3 weeks in, he was at $1 million annual revenue. In June 2025, Wix bought him for $80 million, and he built it all by himself. Cursor, the AI coding tool, went from 1 million in revenue to over $1 billion in 18 months, and recently got acquired for $60 billion by Stripe. Midjourney, which bootstrapped with 40 employees, hit $200 million in annualized revenue in just under 2 years. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman said it out loud in a leaked 2023 conversation. He said, "In my little group chat with my tech CEO friends, there's this betting pool for the first year there is a one-person billion-dollar company, which would have been unimaginable without AI, and now it will happen." That sentence is a eulogy for the 20th century firm. The pyramid of specialists, the VP of this, the VP of that, the 10-person team to manage the CRM. All of this is collapsing into one curious generalist with a laptop and good prompts. The cost of expertise is going vertical. The cost of executing on expertise is going to zero. Every Bitcoiner hits this moment. You need cash, maybe for a house deposit, an emergency, or a tax bill, and you're staring at your stack thinking, do I really want to sell this? Here's the thing, you don't have to. You can borrow against your Bitcoin instead, so there's also no taxable event and your stack can keep on stacking. This is where Firefish comes in, a peer-to-peer marketplace for Bitcoin-backed loans. And Firefish is not a lender. They built a protocol that makes this all possible, which is exactly why they never,
ever have to touch your Bitcoin. During your loan, your Bitcoin sits in an on-chain multisig secured by open source code. You can find offers for different amounts, durations, and rates at firefish.io. And when you decide to get a loan, you can use code BRAM to get 30% off your first loan's fees. That's firefish.io and code BRAM.
Now, before I go any further, I want to stop and be honest with you because I know how this sounds. So you might be hearing me and thinking, so you're saying we don't need experts and experts are over? Everybody just YouTubes their own neurosurgery now? No, I'm saying something much more precise, and I'm going to call it the 80-20 floor. Roughly 80% of what the credentialed expert class has been doing, the opinion having, the forecasting, the nudging, the dietary guidelines, the policy memos, the investment advice, the parenting manuals, the career coaching, that 80% is the decentralizing part. Generalists with AI and access to primary sources can handle it often better and almost always cheaper. But the remaining 20% is real. Cardiac surgery, neurosurgery, bridge engineering, commercial aviation, nuclear reactor safety. For those things, expertise is cumulative, embodied, and apprenticed. There is a 2002 study in the New England Journal of Medicine that found high-volume hospitals had mortality rates 2 to 10 percentage points lower than low-volume hospitals for complex surgeries. That's thousands of lives a year from real hands-on competence. In commercial aviation, we have 1.13 accidents per million flights in 2024, down from 3.72 in 2005. That improvement came from an international centralized expert system, and you cannot really crowdsource that. This is why the sovereign generalist is not anti-expertise. The sovereign generalist knows the difference, handles the 80 and defers the real 20. The deference is precise, earned, and narrow. It's the exact opposite of what we had before, which was blanket deference to a credentialed class whether they knew what they were doing or not. Which finally brings me to money, because money is the purest expression of the whole thing. Think about what the Federal Reserve actually is. 12 voting members of the Federal Open Market Committee, most of them PhD economists, meeting a few times a year, setting the short-term interest rate, which is the single most important price in the global economy for 330 million Americans. It is literally a planned economy wearing a market economy suit. And now I want you to remember the phrase from earlier, knowledge monopoly. Flexner installed a doorkeeper over medicine. The Fed installed a doorkeeper over money. Same structure, same logic, same failure mode. And like every other central planner in history, the Fed has been systematically, embarrassingly wrong. Likely to be contained, as Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke said in 2007. We've never had a decline in house prices on a nationwide basis, Bernanke in 2005. Inflation is transitory, Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen all throughout 2021. It's probably a good time to retire that word. Jerome Powell on November 2021, officially taking the word transitory behind the shed and shooting it. By the way, CPI peaked at 9.1% in June 2022. The Fed's December 2021 dot plot projected end of 2022 rates around 0.9%. The actual was 4.25 to 4.5%. The Fed's own forecast of its own behavior missed by 350 basis points in 1 year. Meanwhile, the US M2 money supply went from about 4.6 trillion in 2000 to about 21 trillion in 2024. The Fed balance sheet went from 900 billion in 2007 to nearly 9 trillion in 2022. The dollar has lost roughly 97% of its purchasing power since the Fed was founded in 1913. This is not a functioning system. This is the exact knowledge problem Hayek described in his 1945 paper. Hayek's point was simple. Real economic knowledge is distributed. It lives in millions of local situations, local prices, local tastes. No expert committee can aggregate it from above. And then in 1984, in a recorded interview at the University of Freiburg, Hayek said the thing I've been waiting to quote in a video like this. He said, I don't believe we shall ever have good money again before we take it out of the hands of government. We can take it violently out of the hands of government. All we can do is by some sly, roundabout way introduce something they cannot stop. Something they cannot stop. On October 31st, 2008, in the middle of the worst financial panic in 80 years, a pseudonymous developer named Satoshi Nakamoto published a 9-page white paper. On January 3, 2009, the first Bitcoin block was mined, with a headline embedded in its base from the Times of that day. It said, "Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. A time-stamped protest." 1 month later, Satoshi wrote this: "The root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust." Bitcoin is Hayek's sly roundabout way. It is what decentralized knowledge looks like applied to money. Fixed supply, 21 million coins, and no committee can vote that away. There's a difficulty adjustment every 2016 blocks, and a halving every 4 years, which is all coded in, indifferent to any election. There is no dot plot, no FOMC, there's no maestro, and the price emerges from millions of distributed actors all around the world, exactly the way Hayek said real knowledge emerges. Nobody sets it, and everyone contributes to it. The fight over Bitcoin isn't, at its core, a fight about returns or inflation hedges. It's the money shaped version of the same fight playing out in medicine, education, journalism, and in work itself. Do you want your value measured by a committee of PhDs who have already admitted under oath that they don't understand their own models? Or do you want it measured by a global, digital, neutral monetary protocol nobody controls and which is secured by math and physics? Now, to tie this all together, I want to go somewhere a little bigger because I think this shift is about more than institutions. The worldview that produced the expert regime is the Enlightenment mechanical worldview. Descartes says the body is a machine. Newton says the universe is a clock. Laplace said if you knew every particle, you could predict everything. It's a breathtakingly powerful picture, and it built the modern world, but it also has a shadow. If the universe is a machine, then somewhere there has to be a mechanic, someone who pulls the right levers. That someone in the 20th century version was the expert. The 21st century is looking less and less like a machine. The physicist Philip Anderson wrote a paper in 1972 called More is Different, where he argued that reductionism does not imply constructionism. At each level of complexity, entirely new properties appear. Emergence is real, systems grow, and they aren't built. Stephen Wolfram, in A New Kind of Science, calls this computational irreducibility. Some systems can only be understood by being run, not by being modeled. The planner's God is dead. And the older mystic traditions always knew this. In the Tao Te Ching, in chapter 17, it says, "The best rulers are those whose existence is merely known by the people. The next best are loved and praised. The next are feared, and the worst are despised." Wu Wei, which is acting without forcing, is the Taoist move. It's not about being passive, it's about alignment, working with the grain of what's actually happening. The sovereign generalist is, in a funny way, a very old figure returning. The village polymath, the person who sees the system as a whole. And what makes the new version different is that now, for the first time in human history, you walk around with the sum of recorded human knowledge in your pocket, plus a personal intelligence that can help you navigate it, plus a monetary system that can't be debased by people who don't understand their own models. And this isn't about nostalgia, it's about realignment. We are remembering collectively that reality is not a machine to be engineered from above, it's an emergent order we are part of. And the right posture inside an emergent order isn't control, it's participation. You learn, you test, you own your decisions, and you stack sats. Here's what I keep on coming back to. The expert regime told you for 100 years that the world was too complicated for you and that you needed a specialist to interpret it, that you should outsource your judgment and trust the doorkeeper. Now that story is over, not because the world got simpler, it got vastly more complicated, but the tools to navigate it are finally in your hands. You are allowed to be curious again. You are allowed to read across fields. You are allowed to take your health, your money, your attention, and your kids' education back from the people who, let's be honest, never really had your interest at heart. The real experts, the 20, will still be there when you need them. The 80% is yours. The pendulum has already swung, and you are the sovereign generalist. I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, if you want to help me shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, please like this video and subscribe to stay connected. I hope to see you for our next episode. Bye.